Joseph, he was, elevated to the position just under Pharaoh. And he lived 80 more years after this. He served his family, and he served the world by keeping them from starvation. Also, the Pharaoh gained more land through this. We can read about this in Genesis 46, 28 through 34. Also in chapter 47, 13 through 26. And Joseph's dad, Jacob, he died. But before he died, Joseph fulfilled his promise to him that he would bury him in the promised land. He kept this promise that he would. We can read about this in Genesis 47, 29 through 31. Also in chapter 49, 28 through 50, verse 14. Remember, Joseph, he had forgiven his brothers for the things they had done to him. But his brothers, they had a hard time believing that Joseph really forgave him. Really? It was very hard on them. And after Joseph's father died, they thought, well, maybe he would want to kill them. But he had forgiven them. He said, yes, I forgive you. And he gave them a short explanation of how the Lord arranges everything. It is the Lord's providence of everything that happens. He said, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God, he meant it for good, to bring it about, everything together, that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now that quote that Joseph said that he was telling his brother, that points to the teaching of concurrence. And what that means is, it means that God plans everything to work together for the people, the good of the people, good or bad, whatever happens, he works it together. And Joseph, he knew working through him that these things had happened through his experience. It was God's plans all along. He works everything together perfectly. And it's all for the good. Many people lived through what happened. God works through evil and through good that people do. Both. God brings everything together. And God meant for the brothers, for their purposes, even though that they were, evil things that they did, he used their purposes and he worked them together. He used their sin. Sometimes that's hard for us to understand. We need to trust that he is holy and also that he is sovereign over all things. He uses the things that people do for the ultimate good. He himself, though, is separate from all evil. He is holy. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. After Jacob died, Joseph, he had his family promise that they would take his remains back to the promised land to bury. And we can read about this in Genesis 50, 22 through 26. Egypt, it was a good land. It was a good life for them, for Joseph and for his family. And yes, indeed it was. But Joseph, he knew that there was a better land for them. And he believed to hold on to the inheritance through the generations that God had promised to give to the people of Israel. And that God's presence would always be with them. They had kept their faith in him. And the people would have the life-giving force of the Lord and the Lord's blessing with them. And they would need to live a life of gratitude for this, an attitude of thankfulness. Wow, Joseph, he kept his eyes on God and God's people, God's promises. He had faith and he knew that life was found only in the presence of the Lord. He knew that the presence of the Lord was life-giving and his judgments were right. And this was important for Joseph to know that his resurrection lied in the promised land, the people of Israel, and in God. And was this going to be the end? No, it's not. It was a picture of God's plan to take the whole earth for himself, all of God's people to enjoy eternity with the life-giving resurrection. Read about this in Revelation chapter 21. Let's apply this to our Christian life. Joseph knew that God did all things good for his people, and he knew it was the promised land that was meant for them to be in Canaan, that God had promised to them. He didn't know how things were going to work out, but he knew that they were, that all things were going to come together. He knew this from the experiences he'd had with the Lord. He knew the Lord kept his promises. He had all through history. And he knew that God would do whatever he said he'd do. He'd always done that, so he knew he could trust in him. God would keep his promises. It's the same that we know we can trust in God. The church today, all around the world, sometimes the church seems spiritually dull. They seem like they're negative. And they're like they're not moving forward, but the church is moving forward even if we can't see it. God's moving it forward to the future when we will see all things together come together for the